Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the wildly complex, completely contradictory life of football's greatest flawed genius. We're drawing from a really fascinating source today, The Boy from Fiorito, to map out the sheer roller coaster that was the life of Diego Armando Maradona. Whether you're a diehard football fan or just someone fascinated by the extreme edges of human triumph and tragedy, This Explainer is going to show you how a boy from a Buenos Aires shantytown became an absolute immortal symbol. Get ready, because this is a story where the hero and the villain are the exact same person, often on the very same day. It's a profound look at what happens when we treat human beings like gods, and a stark reminder of how incredibly fragile we all are underneath.
Okay, picture this. It's June 22nd, 1986, the World Cup quarterfinal in Mexico City, Argentina versus England. In the space of just 4 minutes, Diego Maradona scores 2 goals that pretty much define his entire existence. The first is the infamous hand of God. He literally leaps up and punches the ball into the net. I mean, it's theft, it's cunning, it is a literal crime on the pitch. But then, 4 minutes later, he scores what is universally considered the goal of the century. He takes the ball in his own half and just slaloms through the entire English team. It's pure genius. It's a masterpiece of physical perfection. And you know, the real paradox of Maradona is that these two realities, the cheat and the absolute master, came from the exact same man, in the exact same match.
So how do you even make sense of a guy who cannot be neatly summarized? Well, our source introduces this brilliant central framework, the 4 forces: the gift, the weight, the hunger, and the myth. This framework is absolutely crucial because it explains how his most magnificent triumphs and his most devastating downfalls didn't just happen randomly. They stemmed from the exact same root. You literally cannot separate the greatness from the ruin. So we're going to trace these 4 forces through his life to see exactly how they built him up and how they ultimately tore him down.
All right, Part 1, The Potrero and the Gift, born in Villa Fioretta. Let's rewind a bit to 1960, down to the southern edge of Buenos Aires. Villa Fiorito was a shantytown, a place defined by dirt floors and deep, deep scarcity. And this is where we find the potrero. Now, a potrero isn't some beautifully manicured green field. Far from it. It's a rough, unfenced dirt pitch filled with stones and ruts. You survive the potrero by keeping the ball glued to your feet while older, much bigger kids shoved you around. Our source emphasizes that Maradona's impossible left foot wasn't just some miracle dropped from the sky. It was scar tissue. It was a survival skill forged in constant, brutal physical battles for the ball and a place that promised absolutely nothing.
And out of that intense scarcity came a terrifying drive. I really want you to notice this concept. My hunger is filled by being extraordinary. Even before he was a teenager, Maradona realized something huge. His incredible gift actually provided for his deeply impoverished family. By being amazing with a football, he could literally put food on their table. And this links his gift directly to his hunger. Because it wasn't just a hunger for food, right? It was a lifelong, bottomless hunger for love, for belonging, and for that feeling of finally being enough.
Moving on to Part 2, A City Needs a King, The Climb to Naples. Before he became a king, he was Argentina's adopted son, rising up through Argentina's juniors to Boca Juniors. But man, his climb into Europe was brutal. It was chaotic. In 1982, he transfers to Barcelona for a world record fee, but he's heavily fouled and completely unprotected by the referees. In 1983, his ankle is practically shattered by a tackle so severe the defender was actually nicknamed the Butcher of Bilbao. Finally, just pushed way beyond his limits, in 1984, Maradona erupts in a massive, chaotic brawl on the pitch during the Copa del Rey final, right in front of the King of Spain. Isolated and miserable, he gets pushed out. And so, he signs with Napoli, and that changes the whole shebang. To put this into perspective, just imagine 70,000 people packed into the San Paulo Stadium in Naples. Why were they there? Not to watch a match. There was no game. They were there just to see Diego Maradona hold up a Napoli shirt. They had literally bought a god on credit.
Now you've got to understand the dynamic of Italy at the time to get why this was so huge. The wealthy, industrial north, we're talking cities like Milan and Turin, they openly mocked the impoverished south, especially Naples. Naples bought Maradona to be their savior, and miraculously, he actually delivered. By winning 2 Italian league titles, the Scudetti, he single-handedly reversed the entire natural order of Italian football. He didn't just win some trophies, he delivered redemption to a city that the rest of the country looked down upon. But the weight he was carrying to do that? Astronomical.
Which brings us right back to the hand of God. and this fascinating cultural concept called viveza criolla. It basically translates to the native cleverness of the underdog. You see, where the English, and let's be honest, much of the world, saw a blatant cheat, the poor and the marginalized saw viveza criolla. They saw a clever, entirely necessary victory of the powerless against the powerful. To truly understand Maradona, you have to understand that he viewed himself as using the street smarts of the slum to outwit the wealthy establishment.
Which leads us to part 3, the hunger and the fall, the weight of adoration. You see, his absolute peak was winning the 1986 World Cup for Argentina, but strangely enough, that summit is exactly where his devastating descent began. The weight of carrying a city and a whole country became utterly crushing. His descent into addiction wasn't just some isolated moral failing, it was a symptom of his unending appetite. Think about it, the stadium adoration, the extreme generosity to his family, the cocaine, the massive food consumption. It was all the exact same mechanism. He was desperately trying to fill a hole created by extreme poverty and unimaginable fame. That same bottomless hunger from his childhood was just seeking out new objects to fill a void that, sadly, could never actually be filled.
And the unraveling was just so rapid and so incredibly public. In the 1990 World Cup, he openly asked the fans of Naples to support Argentina instead of Italy in the semifinal. That completely divided the city and totally angered the Italian establishment. His protective bubble popped. In 1991, he fails a drug test, gets a 15-month ban, and that basically destroys his prime playing years. Then by 1994, he's attempting this massive comeback at the World Cup in the USA, but he tests positive again and is expelled in total disgrace. When he was expelled in '94, he famously said, "They cut my legs off." Let that sink in for a second. To a man whose entire identity, whose sheer genius and self-worth all resided in his lower body, this wasn't just some sporting ban. It literally felt to him like an amputation of the self.
Part 4, the immortal myth, surviving himself.
So, the decades after he hung up his boots, incredibly turbulent, marked by severe health crises, near-death experiences, and just this sheer, stubborn will to survive. He proudly wore tattoos of Fidel Castro on his leg and Che Guevara on his arm. He strongly aligned himself with the Latin American left, viewing himself as this permanent voice for the powerless. He was deliberately opposing global superpowers and football's governing bodies. Essentially, he was continuing his Poltrero mentality, but now he was doing it on a geopolitical stage.
He also tried to stay in the game through coaching. He managed Argentina in the 2010 World Cup, went over to Dubai, managed down in the second division in Mexico, and finally at Gimnasia in Argentina. And these stints were, as you might guess, wildly emotional and chaotic. But what they proved, rather tragically, was that his unique, purely instinctive gift lived only inside his own body. It was something that simply could not be taught, organized, or handed down to anyone else. Ultimately, his life ended in the exact same kind of chaos that defined it. Diego Maradona died in November 2020 at the age of 60. And as our source notes, his passing immediately sparked an unresolved reckoning. His medical team faces ongoing medical malpractice trials stretching into 2025 and 2026, plagued by scandal and mistrials. The argument over how he died remains just as chaotic and untidy as the argument over how he lived. Now, for decades, Maradona was haunted by the idea of being replaced. But when Lionel Messi led Argentina to World Cup glory in 2022, wearing that exact same number 10, the country proved something really beautiful. Maradona's legacy wasn't erased or replaced. It was a continuation of hope. The jersey was inherited, and his name was woven right into that new triumph.
Because let's be real, you cannot erase a man whose followers literally built a religion for him. The Iglesia Maradoniana, the Church of Maradona, was founded in 1998. They actually count the years from his birth. It really highlights the sheer, unprecedented scale of his worship. He gave the poor and humiliated a God who came right from their own dirt streets, a God who never, ever pretended to be anything else.
So what does this all mean? Can you ever neatly summarize a man who was simultaneously a god to millions and deeply, tragically human? The answer is no, you just can't. The cheat and the genius, the savior and the addict, Diego Maradona was a fascinating impossibility. And perhaps the real takeaway from this explainer isn't about football at all. Maybe it's about what happens when we demand our heroes be flawless, only to realize they're just as broken as the rest of us. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. See you next time.